Hey friends, it's Jessica from Three Rivers Homestead, and I have been busy doing canning projects this past week. We did 4 projects that I want to bring you in this video. We did some grape jelly, applesauce, canned tomatoes, and a beef soup starter. So if learning about that interests you, why don't you stick around? But first, I want to say a late happy Thanksgiving to all of my American friends here. We had a lovely time celebrating with both of our families. We went to my family Thanksgiving on Thursday and Adam's family here on Friday. And then now we're back on the property just working towards being prepared for the winter. It's actually very cold here. Temperatures dropped. Adam was busy this week prepping more wood, and that's sort of what we do. His wheelhouse is making sure we have enough wood to stay warm for the winter, and my wheelhouse is making sure we have enough food to stay fed through the winter. And so all of these canning projects were part of stocking the pantry for us for all of the meals we're going to do in our pantry challenge that I will bring you in January and February. But first, before I bring you our canning tutorials, I want to thank the sponsor of today's video, which is Backwoods Home Magazine and their sister magazine, Self-Reliance Magazine. I love these publications. And if you like canning content, the kind that I'm bringing in this video, you're going to love these magazines because every single edition has multiple tutorials for different canning projects that you can do. You can see here there was a lot of apple canning information. And then in this winter's Self-Reliance magazine, there's a great tutorial on canning a meaty vegetable soup. So if this type of content, the stuff that I show on my channel, interests you, you should get a subscription. And right now you can get 50% off using the link in the video description. This would make it a great gift for someone this year if there's someone that loves homesteading content. So make sure you check it out. And once again, I want to thank Backwoods Home Magazine for their support of our channel and for sponsoring today's video. So as I said, I'm doing canning projects right now, mostly to clear space up in our freezers because we have 2 beef being processed in less than a month, and also just to do some odds and ends that I didn't get to over the summer. So we're going to start with grape jelly. I have 2 quarts of Concord grape juice. I have my pectin here. This is so easy to make jelly, and let me show you. I think I whipped this batch of jelly up in about 25 minutes. Like, this is something you can do in no time at all. So I'm starting by straining out my Concord grapes. I'm going to dilute them a little bit. I want 5 cups of my fruit juice. And then we're going to get that on the stove. And I'm going to add to that my package of pectin. Now, there are lots of options for you in using pectin. There are low sugar varieties. There are regular sugar varieties. There are things like Pomona's pectin that I've showed you in the past. Today I'm using just a regular package of Sure Gel pectin. This is going to be a high sugar recipe, so this is not a health food. This is definitely a treat. And for our Thanksgiving meal at my family's house this year, I was in charge of bringing the jelly and the jams for the dinner rolls. And so I made this batch of Concord jelly specifically for that reason. So that we would have grape jelly because it's a favorite. So to the pectin and juice that I had brought to a boil, I then added 7 cups of sugar. Yes, that's a lot of sugar, but when you divide that out into all the little jars, you'll see that it's really not that much per jar. So once we added our sugar, we want to bring it back to a rolling boil and let it boil for 1 minute, and then we're going to immediately take it off the heat and begin filling our jars. So with this recipe, you can use either half pints or full pints, and the processing time is going to be the same. It doesn't make a difference. So I'm kind of doing a mix of the two. I like to do half pints. 1 half pint lasts for 1 meal of, if I made like an almond butter and jelly sandwich as a lunch for my kids. 1 little half pint right here we'll use in one setting, or if I'm making dinner rolls, we'll use a half pint with a meal. So that is how I divided the jelly up, and then I'm taking a wet rag to wipe off the rims of my jars because that jelly can be very sticky and that will affect the seal of our jars. And speaking of seals, we are going to use our 4 jars canning lids. Four Jars is having a Black Friday sale right now where you can get up to 40% off your canning essentials. So make sure you check that out. I'll put a link in the video description and use my code 3rivers10 when you check out. So we got our lids on all of our jars. We're going to put our rings on there, and then these are going to process in the water bath canner for 10 minutes. And you can see that we didn't sterilize our jars beforehand, and that is because as long as your processing time is at least 10 minutes, your jars and your lids and your rings and everything are going to sterilize through the canning process. And then as always, I added a little bit of vinegar to the water bath. That helps prevent the mineral film that our hard well water will produce on the outside of the jars if we don't add the vinegar. So I'm very happy to be stocked back up on Concord Grape Jelly. This is one of my kids' favorite jellies. I'd say this and cherry are probably the most requested around here. Sometimes for breakfast like this, I'll bake some homemade bread, and they'll have bread with jelly with a protein as a side, either bacon or sausage or eggs or all of the above. It makes a really simple breakfast. We do go through quite a bit of jelly throughout the year, and like I said, one of these little half pints we will go through that in one meal. So I can never have enough jelly on the shelves. And grape was something that I didn't get to over the summer. So this was the perfect opportunity here now that the weather is cooler and we're not in the garden anymore. I can catch up on all of these little canning projects that I need to accomplish in order to have my stocked pantry this winter. The next of those projects will be applesauce. So I did a video on all the different apple varieties that we put in storage this year, and these Golden Delicious are a variety that do not store well, and they're beginning to soften a little bit since it's been a month and a half or so since we purchased them. So it's time to do something with these apples, and we love to make applesauce out of these because they make a tartar applesauce than some of the sweeter red apple varieties. And so the first thing I'm doing is just chopping all of the apples up, and I'm saving the cores and putting them in that glass gallon jar because we're going to turn those into apple scrap vinegar. That's how we stretch $1 and make sure all of these canning projects are worth it. We use every bit of the apples. Nothing will go to waste. So we're going to get all of the apples chopped. I did not peel them. I'll show you how we'll remove the peels later on. And then we're going to put just a little bit of water in the bottom of the crock pot or the pot that's on the stove. And we're going to let those begin to simmer down. And in the meantime, I'm going to deal with those apple cores. I've done this for you guys many times. For 1 gallon like this, I add 3/4 a cup of sugar. And then I add a little bit of a mother of vinegar from a previous batch. Any raw apple cider vinegar will have the mother in it. So just pour a little bit of that in and then top it off with water, and it is that simple. We're going to put a breathable lid on the top. I typically use a coffee filter, and I did weigh down those apple cores so that they don't mold above the water line. This is going to sit for about a week or two, and then we'll strain out all of the cores and continue to let it ferment down in the cellar for about 6 to 9 months, just depending on how strong we want the vinegar. So that's a great way to stretch the cost of those apples and turn what would otherwise be waste into another edible product. Back on the stove, our apples are continuing to cook down. We just want them soft enough that we can run them through our food mill here and turn them into sauce. So this saved me the time of having to peel my apples beforehand. Now that they're soft enough, I'll just push them down through the mill here, and all of the sauce and liquid and wonderful juices will go through the holes in the mill, and then anything solid will be left behind if there are any seeds that we may have missed, and then obviously those apple peels. And then, like I said, nothing goes to waste. All of the peels that are left behind, we could freeze dry them and make some type of powder out of them. Or on this occasion, I decided to feed all of the apple peels that were left behind to our chickens. They enjoy those as a delicious treat. Now we're simply going to fill our jars with the applesauce. We could add cinnamon or sugar or anything else that you would like to add to your applesauce to this, and it's not going to affect the processing time. I choose to keep it plain because that little baby back there in the high chair enjoys applesauce. It's one of the few foods that I can get her to eat right now, so I don't want to have added sugar or cinnamon that would burn her little mouth in these jars. I'm mostly canning this up for her at this point. She will eat applesauce every day if I let her. So we are filling up quarts of this. And then once again, just like with the jelly, we're going to want to make sure that we wipe down the rims really well. We're going to get those lids and rings on the jars. And then this applesauce is going to process in the water bath canner. The quarts will go for 20 minutes. If I were putting the applesauce into pints, it would be 15 minutes. So most of the apple varieties that we bought for storage are holding up wonderfully. We're still able to eat raw apples. We go through maybe 2 or 3 bags a week for our family, and that is great. But any of the varieties, there were a couple that we bought that weren't for storage. We're at the point where they need to be canned up. So my next project will be turning some more into a batch of apple pie filling, and I'll be sure to bring you guys along for that process as well. I'm hoping to maybe do that next week. So apples aren't the only product that we have stored away that we need to do something with. The next one is our bags of tomatoes that we have in the freezer. If you have your frozen tomatoes in the freezer for more than 2 months, they'll begin to lose nutrients. You really want to do something with these as soon as possible. And for us, we're just about at the 2-month mark, so I need to get busy. On this first batch, I'm going to make some just canned tomatoes. And what I love about frozen tomatoes is that all you have to do is run them under warm water straight out of the freezer, and those peels come right off. It is much easier to do it this way than to have to boil and slice and peel the tomatoes the old-fashioned way if you have the tomatoes raw. So this is one of those benefits of holding off and dealing with your tomatoes later on. Just put them in the freezer while the summer is, you're really busy in the summer when you're harvesting all of this, and then you could deal with these once everything slows down. So I'm just putting these directly into the pot, and they're going to melt and begin to release their juices. If you want to make a sauce, you could just pour off all of this tomato water that's coming out of the tomatoes, but I am going to go ahead and just can the whole tomatoes in the tomato water. And we're going to primarily use this product for chili throughout the winter. So this was another super easy, quick canning project. All I really had to do was warm up and thaw those tomatoes, and then they were ready to go directly into the jars. If I wanted to make a sauce, like I said, I would drain off the liquid, and then I would take my immersion blender straight into the pot and blend everything down and maybe cook it down to thicken it a little bit. But for today, we are just going to can it this way. And then I am going to need to add about 1/2 teaspoon of citric acid per jar. This just ensures that these tomatoes are acidic enough to be water bath canned. Otherwise, I would have to pressure can them, and that's a much lengthier process. When you bring the canner to pressure and then have to wait for it to come down, it's much easier to just add the citric acid or lemon juice and put them in the water bath canner. I stirred everything around and then lost a little bit of liquid, so I'm adjusting my headspace there to make sure I'm maintaining 1 inch. Of course, wiping down the rims really well, and then we're going through the same process, you guys. We're going to add our washed 4 jars canning lids, add our rings, and then get these into the water bath. Since we're doing quarts, they're going to need to process for 45 minutes. If we were doing pints, it would be 40 minutes. And you're going to see when these come out of the canner, a lot of the solids will float to the top, and then that tomato water will be at the bottom, and that is perfectly normal. You might have seen that with the applesauce a little bit too. All you need to do is shake the jars up once they cool down, and everything will mix back together. And it will be just fine for use. We will enjoy batches of chili with these tomatoes all throughout the winter. My kids will eat chili like twice a week if I let them, so we need as many tomato jars on the shelves as we possibly can. The next project is clearing out soup bones, beef soup bones, from the freezer, and I'm going to turn those into a beef soup base. So I'm just starting by putting the frozen bones directly into the crock pot. I filled it up with water, and then we just let that simmer on low overnight. It was probably about 18 hours that they were in the crock pot. I didn't flavor the broth at all because we're going to put our flavorings into the jars that we are canning. So this project serves two purposes. I also have onions that need to be dealt with before they begin to sprout, and so making a beef soup base is a great way to use up some of these onions. Now my onions aren't sprouting yet, but these were harvested last summer and they will not last forever. So it is important that I do something with them before they begin to sprout, and then I'm last minute trying to figure that out. So all I'm doing is chopping them up and putting the halved onions directly into the jars. We'll deal with those here in a minute. And then I'm also going to use up some garlic, which once again, we need to do as much with this garlic as we can because it will begin to start sprouting probably by late January or February, and I want to use it before that becomes a last minute rushed project. So I put maybe 2 or 3 cloves of garlic per jar and approximately 2 of those smaller onions. And then the simplest way to do this is just to blend those up in the bottom of the jars with my immersion blender. We're kind of making an onion and garlic slurry. Remember, this is just for flavor. It's a flavor base for a soup. From there, I had some celery to use, so I'm just chopping that up. I'm probably putting the equivalent of a cup to a cup and a half of celery per jar. And then I'm going to add my seasonings. I'm doing about a tablespoon of salt, and then you can do whatever you want here. It's not going to affect the safety of the recipe. We're essentially canning a soup, and so flavor it with whatever herbs you want. I'm putting bay leaves in right here. You can put any herbs that you like. I'm going to add some Worcestershire sauce. You could add rosemary, thyme, add some carrots, any other vegetables that you want. This is just if you were going to make a beef soup, or sometimes I might pour a jar of this over a beef roast in the crock pot. Any of the flavorings that would be good in that would be great to add to your jars at this point. And then once all of our seasonings and spices are in there, we can begin topping it off with that beef broth that we had cooking in the crock pot. This is super rich beef broth that is just packed with gelatin. It's so thick. This is going to make a really tasty meal here this winter for the family. And so I'm just going to fill the jars, and then I am going to stir them up a little bit because that always makes some of those air bubbles come out, and then the water level, the liquid level on there goes down, and I need to readjust the headspace to 1 inch to make sure it's safe for canning. And then, of course, that broth is super greasy. Never skip the step of wiping your rims. This is why I always have good seal rates. It's because I wiped my rims and because I use the best canning lids, which, is obviously 4 jars. Once again, make sure you check out the link in the description and stock up while everything is on sale this time of year. So these jars are considered a soup since they're half liquid and half of the solid vegetables, and so we can pressure can these safely as per the National Center for Food Preservation for 75 minutes for quarts. If you did this with pint jars, it would be for 60 minutes. And then while my canner is doing its thing, I'm going to deal with the leftovers of the broth. Look at all that delicious marrow that's left inside the bones. We're not going to waste that. I went through and I picked all of the meat that was left on the bones. We took the marrow out that I'll whip up for the baby. We have all of the rest of the broth that was in the crock pot, and I made a delicious lunch, added a little bit of mushroom, garlic, onion, broccoli to the meat, and served that over the rice that was cooked in the broth, and that was definitely a hit with the family. So now I'm going to get all of these jars labeled. I'm going to add these down to the pantry shelves. I have so many more projects like this that I need to accomplish in the next few weeks in order to get the freezers cleared for our beef that we are taking to the butcher. So if you enjoyed this type of content, make sure to let me know and I'll bring you some of those other projects that I'll be doing in the coming weeks. I hope you guys are staying warm wherever you are, and we will see you back next week, friends. Goodbye.